professional learning community, which is one of my areas of research as well as change. And we're going to talk about how one facilitates the other. That we know we have no option right now. We can't say, no thanks, but I'm not interested in that contour. No, we don't need this. We don't have the option. So we know that we have to deal with it, and as strong educators, we want to figure out what's the best way that we can deal with it. So whether you are in the classroom, whether you are a principal, we are all teacher leaders, we are all longtime teachers, educators, we're going to look at how do we deal with issues of change, and we're going to look at the learning community as a response. These are the things that we want to address. I mentioned this last time, this is only a 2-hour session. I probably have a good 6 hours, and I cut down from the last session, but I did give you some things that we may not have sufficient time to explore in depth, but I wanted to be able to give you some things to reflect on and to look at. So, you have a few articles that you picked up, which we won't touch on those, but it just gives you some additional reading to be able to look at. But we're going to, as I said, talk about the change principles. If I could tell you something that I could give you a heads up so that you could predict what was going to happen, would you want that so you could be prepared? Yes, I mean, I know I like when somebody tells me, oh, look, when you go around that corner, that's where that cop parks all the time. So watch your speed, because you know what? When I go around the corner, I slow down because I know that's something to anticipate. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what are some principles of change that we know when something occurs, we will be able to anticipate it. We're going to talk about the human side of change, because that's very important to you personally as well as to the individuals that you are working with. How many of y'all are currently in the classroom as a teacher? Okay? And then how many school levels administrators do we have? Principal, assistant principal, curriculum coordinators, instruction, and then I know that we have some district people here too. All of these positions have to understand whether you're on the right side or the left side, whether you're in the classroom or the outside, you have to understand how it's impacting you first, and then how it's impacting the people that you're dealing with. We're going to talk a little bit about the PLC process, and process being the key, and it is a collaborative process. Whether you use the label professional learning community or not is relevant. Many of the, I guess I've been working in that avenue in terms of researching for the last 15 years. And some of the schools that we have seen, my research team has seen the best practices in terms of learning communities, they didn't use that term at all. It was just who they were and what they were all about. They worked as a unit. And I'm going to share with you some of the research and why a lot of people are talking about learning communities, because what you can anticipate getting out of it. And it's very important to know when you have to put time and energy in something, what are you going to get out of it? And that's what we want to look at. And then we're going to talk, if we have time in the end, about stages of concern. And we'll be talking a little bit about stages of concern. Good morning. Good afternoon, Mr. Staten. Welcome. How are you?
Good.
I take the liberty of giving a special hello to someone that I know. So let's think about change for a little bit. How many of you are familiar with Eastman Kodak? Some of you probably a little less. And that, would you say?
I said I'm that old.
Oh, you're that old. Okay.
Yeah.
Eastman Kodak used to be one of the prime companies. They were huge. They were the first to manufacture both still and movie cameras. So I mean, Eastman Kodak was #1. Then all of a sudden, so they were really good at that type of photography. Then this new thing came out called digital photography, and they said, no, not interested. No, we have this in place. We don't need that. And then that's where everything started going, the direction. And they started saying, okay, we're not going to go in that direction, but you know what? We're going to work harder as an organization. And their people, whether they were in the shop, in the production line, whether they were the salespeople, they were working hard. But their sales continued to fall off. They saw their company eroding. And it was like, but we are working hard, but they weren't meeting the needs of their clientele anymore. Now, Eastman Kodak is actually still a company, and they still do, they also not only did digital and still photography, not digital, I'm sorry, movie and still photography, they also had to do with paper and chemicals, and that was actually one of the areas that they extended. But they did not look at learning to meet the needs, and they didn't look at what was new. How many of you have heard of the company Apple? Okay, different case scenario. Now, Apple just came out with their i5 or whatever they're calling it. When they were, and I'm going to go back and talk about the i4 and the cannot be satisfied with we're the best school. You know, you may have been in the highest performing school, but that's no longer sufficient. Because if you are the highest performing school and you are not moving forward, then that's not sufficient. So that does present some dilemmas because, you know, it can be a little discouraging that when you're doing well and yet we're not satisfied with that. But what's happened with accountability, whether we like it or not, is that the schools that have been challenged to do better, our high-performing schools, have done better. They have increased. So whereas those schools that were at, you know, 110, 115 when they started, and they were thinking 120, and then they started thinking 140, you know, they're at 135. They went past that 120. Had we said, you know, you're the top, you don't need to worry about it, they would have stayed where they were. So it's a matter of how do you continue to learn, to improve, how do you look at your strengths first before you look at your areas in need. Because we need to rely on our strengths if we want to look at our areas in need. So when we think about Eastman Kodak, and I already kind of answered this question for you, in terms of how is it similar to us, in terms of what's happening with it, and it's the whole relationship to accountability, that we have to make sure we are meeting the needs of the current market. And the current market, whether it's in the way of policymakers telling us to do things, and you know, there are some things that we just have to say, this is how it's going to be, so how do we make sure that we're doing that most appropriately? Okay, this is a picture of a jigsaw puzzle. How is that like change? Give me some ideas. How do you think dealing with the issue of change is like a jigsaw puzzle?
There's lots of different parts to change.
Lots of different parts. And do all the parts look alike?
No.
What else? Let's be more creative. What else?
I think part of it too is like, you know, with a puzzle, especially if you have thousands of pieces, you have to try it on, see if it fits, and I think people tend to be that way with change. You know, let me try it, see if I like it, maybe I'll accept it, maybe I'll reject it.
So you have to see what goes together.
It goes together.
And sometimes you may think this goes together, but it's not quite a good fit. So rather than forcing it, you need to see if there's some other option. Okay.
Just merge.
Yes, merge,
All of the change really doesn't come together until all of the pieces are together. Everybody's pulling their own part, everybody contributing, and then you tie it all together, then you have the change.
That's good because it's very fragmented. You have some pieces in place, but you don't have the whole picture. How many of you, when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle, put the cover in front of you? I do that, for sure. Why do you do that? Yeah, you want to know what it looks like. You know, just think if you had a jigsaw puzzle that had no picture, no color at all, it was just cardboard cut up, that would be quite difficult. You put it there so you have a vision of what that vision is like. You want to see, okay, what am I trying to build? What is it supposed to look like? And when you have that picture, then you start to understand how the pieces fit. Also, when you're working on a jigsaw puzzle, you ever been doing this, and I haven't done jigsaw puzzles in a while, but you know, you're sitting down doing it, and you kind of stuck, and all of a sudden somebody walks up and says, oh look, this goes right here. And you think, oh, I didn't see that. It's a different perspective. When you have individuals working collaboratively, you get more done because you're looking from different perspectives. We have different perspectives in here because we have different lived experiences. Our beliefs, our perspectives are based upon what's happened. If you and I are entering into some type of situation, but we come with different backgrounds, and we're going to view it differently. If you had a good experience with collaboration, and we talk about collaboration, you're there. If I had a bad experience with it, you know, I'm a little resistant from the beginning. So it's based upon what has happened to us in the past. But it is definitely changes putting the pieces together. So what we're going to be focusing on, our essential question for this is, how does change impact us? How does it change impact the change your practice. I need for you to come at this time instead of that time. That's our incremental. That's our technical. That's our first order. Now, I can't go to you and say, I need for you to believe that this is better. I need for you to truly value that. No, just because you value it doesn't mean that's fundamental. That's the deep-rooted adaptive change. The issue is we have to address the surface level changes. And like I said, surface level is not bad. It has to be attended to. And when we address the technical, the first order, the incremental, in a positive way that we see positive results, then we're willing to change our beliefs. Then our values change, or we value whatever the process is. What happens is many schools address the technical change, but if you never move beyond the technical change to the more adaptive or fundamental change, then it is short-lived. All the work that you're going to do to improve your school, to improve student performance, to improve teacher performance, you want that work to count long-term. You don't want it to be done and next year we start from ground zero. We need to make some headway and then to start here next year, not go back again. So we have to make sure. I'll give you an example. You know, not as much lately, although we have schools that have reverted. Several years ago when many of our high schools changed from the traditional 6-period days, some 7-period days, to the block schedule, whether it was rolling or alternate or A or B, most teachers took the right approach in that they thought, okay, if I'm going from a 50-minute or a 60-minute class and now I have 90 minutes, it doesn't mean that I just stand up there and I'll lecture for longer. It means I have to change what I do in class so that I'm going to have to get our students more involved, and it's going to be more constructive knowledge, and I'm going to have students take part actively as learners rather than just listening. The changing to the block schedule is your technical change, your first order. The changing the way you think and thus do things in terms of making long-term improvement is our more adaptive change. So schools that made a change in the schedule, but their teachers did exactly the same, all they did was technical change, and they didn't see any improvement. So then they started saying, well, I thought this block schedule was going to help us. I don't see any help. No, you're just doing what you were doing for longer periods of time. But those schools that said, oh God, now I have my students who are doing projects instead of reading in the science book, we're actually doing hands-on experimentation. They saw more significant changes because they were getting to the deeper, fundamental, adaptive change. And that's where you have to go. But like I said, you don't sell short the technical. You don't skip over the technical and get to the adaptive. That doesn't happen. But you have to realize that you cannot just live in the technical. You can't be satisfied. Okay, we got that schedule down. We finished. We're not finished. We have the schedule down. Now really let's explore what it is that we're doing with the schedule. I don't have a whole lot of quotes for you, but this is one that I really like about Fulham because he talks about when we're thinking about change, we become so accustomed to the presence of change, which, my God, if you're in education, you might as well become accustomed to it, that we rarely stop to think about what change really means as we are experiencing it at a personal level. More importantly, we almost never stop to think about what it means for others around us. So if you are in a leadership position, formal or informal, you certainly have to be concerned with how that change is relating to you. But you definitely have to be concerned with how are the other individuals relating to change. How is it impacting them? You know, sometimes we understand our level of frustration. You know, we might go in as administrators into the teacher's classroom and we're tired and we have something else to deal with and we're doing that, and then except when they have a little attitude with us. You know, we need to think about what did we bring into there? You know, why would we expect them to say, oh yeah, come on, I'm fine with all these changes. If we're not fine as administrators, we have to think about how do we make sure that we're attending to ourselves and attending to them. And teachers, those of you that are in the classroom, it's the administrator's responsibility to make sure they are meeting your needs rather than you are meeting their needs. Administrators, I'm sorry, but that's how it is. That's how it is. So it would be so nice if I were the principal and if I walk in and this is my new faculty and I'd say, oh, hello, my name is Dianne. Let me tell you about who I am and how I operate and how I roll, and you just need to attend to that. That's not the case. I have to come in, and if I'm meeting with this teacher and I'm in her classroom, I know what kind of relationship I have to know how she responds. I have to know what I need to do to get her to do work. I can hear, maybe this is very much somebody that is very extroverted, and every time I'm saying something, they, oh, I got it, I got it, I got it. And this one, maybe she didn't have a good experience in the previous school, so I might have to say, well, yeah, let's try it. Let me give you some assistance. As the administrator, you have to be the one who not only gauges your level in terms of adjusting with change, but you're gauging others' level in terms of adjusting for change. So we really have to think about what does it mean in terms of change. Change simulation. We're going to do a quick little activity. It's going to take us a few minutes. When I said, okay, you can sit down, what did most of you do? Sigh relief, but also what I saw. You went back to the way that you were because you were doing something that wasn't very comfortable. And this is, a creative thing I'm asking you to do, but you went back to where you are because you didn't see a need to stay like that. Why was there a need to stay like that? But if it had been, if you stay like you are, then this is what you're going to get. Well, okay, maybe I'm going to be okay with this. I'll stay like I am. But we tend, when we make a change, if we don't see the value in the change, we revert right back to the way that we operated. That's human nature. Or what?
If we like it like that, then we can go back to where we.
Exactly. And we're going to talk about that zone of uncertainty, that discomfort, because you need to understand what you are feeling first before you understand what someone else is feeling. But you have to go beyond what you're feeling and someone else. Some of these things I'm going to give you high points because, as I said, I provided a bit more information than you needed, but I like to do that so you have some takeaways. But when we think about change, let me call your attention to the first one. When you are undergoing significant change, there is actually a sense of loss. There's a sense of anxiety. And there's a lot of research that shows us that actually can be manifested in a physical way. So you physically feel uncomfortable. You feel anxious. You feel anxiety. You feel nervous. Those are not fake things. I'll share this with you. I asked my doctor the other day, okay, look, I know all this stuff like stress, and for somebody to say, you need to take the stress out of your life. and that is how, where is that pill? And I said, I don't understand. Why does stress cause physical problems? And, she very logically said, well, it's a hormonal issue. That when you are stressed, your body is releasing adrenaline. Your body is releasing cortisol. Your body is doing all that. So then it starts to attack different things. So that's why you feel uncomfortable. You feel that anxiousness. You're thinking, I'm sure you've been in this, I know you have all been in a situation where you're going, you just need that extra breath. That's stress. That's anxiety. So when we ask teachers to make significant changes, we cannot be surprised when they are feeling uncomfortable with that change. That should be understood. That's kind of a given. So if it's something that's minor, then, we all should be able to handle it. But when it's something that is major, when we go and we say, listen, I know it's been 15 years that you've been teaching math in the 4th grade, but because of the change in enrollment, I need for you to now teach reading in the 3rd grade. What if we just done to that teacher? And I say done to the teacher. It's something that we have to do. We have just put that teacher in a very uncomfortable position. She may love reading, but she's thinking right away. She's thinking, I don't have the right material, all my bulletin boards, what are the new reading strategies? I didn't go to the professional development because I only went to the one for math. There's 100 things going through. And we can't just say, okay, so you got that, thanks, and we can't be finished with it. That teacher needs more assistance. We have to help her through that, but there is this sense of loss. I think the second one is critically important with everything that we're addressing right now from the state. Too fast, too much, too hard. I know that we've all said, dear Baton Rouge, can you give us one thing this year, and then next year give us the second thing, and then the year after, can you give us a little time to internalize? But that's not what's happening. So by saying, can you, we know that's not going to be a response that's heard, so we need to think about how do we address all of these issues which are hitting us simultaneously. How do we make sure that we work through it? Change, I'm going to go down here. Change is not sustained without a compelling meaning, which means we have to ask the question, zones of uncertainty. Many of us are uncomfortable with change because we don't know what to expect. We don't know how it's going to look. You know, they're saying they want us to do this new thing. Well, how does that new thing look? Do I have the necessary knowledge? Do I have the necessary skills? Often that feeling of discomfort is because we're not sure if we have what it takes. Now, we may be the best teacher, and we've gotten Teacher of the Year repeatedly, and our students are performing at high levels, but you're asking me to do something differently, so what do I need to do that? Do I have the knowledge? Do I have the skills in order to make these significant changes? And this is what change is all about. You need the necessary knowledge and skills, meaning anytime we make a change, there should be new learning that occurs, which means if we ask multiple changes to happen simultaneously, then we need to figure out where in this process is learning going to occur. When we expect teachers, when we expect administrators to show us new skills are based on knowledge. Knowledge comes before the skills. We have to get the information, we have to understand it, we have to internalize it, we have to digest it before we can do the action. The do the action are our skills. And as far as the beliefs and the values, that doesn't occur until we're doing these things and we see some productivity. When we see some positive outcomes, then we are able to understand this process. And it's like, ooh, you know, that was kind of tough. Oh my God, look, my students are doing so much better than they did in the past. So I guess it was worth it. So it's a matter of understanding the rationale. This is what happens in the change process. And what we need to be careful when we talk about change, if we immediately focus on the outcomes, yeah, we're going to lose. We cannot focus on the outcomes without attending to these two before. But we have to start with the knowledge and skills. You know what's good? The knowledge and the skill is easier to manipulate. It's easy to say, this is a new strategy and this is the information related to the strategy. Now we have to learn it, and we have to learn it through practice. So we get the knowledge, then we practice it. We don't get it right the first time necessarily, but we have to continue to work on it before we're going to change in the disposition. You know, so sometimes you think about teachers that you've worked with, or teachers you think about administrators that you've worked with, and you know, you might say, I don't like their attitude. Most of the time, attitude comes about because there's a lack of knowledge and values related to the kids in the class. We know that many of the kids, many of the students who show disruptive behavior is because they are struggling with learning. So the way they manifest it is with behavior issues. We as adults, we react the same way. You're asking me to do something that I don't know how to do, well, it's easier for me to say, oh, I didn't get that. No, I didn't pay attention, you know. We have to think about it. So we need to be able to provide our teachers with the necessary skills. Okay, I want to give you 10 principles of change. And the principles of change are what I mentioned a while ago, those predictors. If I can tell you that the compass around that corner, you know, I know when I go through parks. I don't know if they do that as much, but parks used to be the place that you had to slow down all the time. I can tell you, having had a few conversations with some officers in parks. Successful. So we put in a requirement that said we are going to do planning that's required. And because I want to make sure everybody's on target, you're going to send the plans to me so that I can review them. So I don't want you to be afraid of having certain policies in place that are a requirement. Now, to put in a policy without having the rationale, you are misstepping. You have to have the logic behind why this is a policy. And then you have to think, sometimes there are mandates that we disagree. But if we are being told that this is what we have to do, or we lose funding, or we lose personnel, then this is what you have to do. And as hard as it is, you might as well think about what is the best way that I can do it. So when there's something down, I know I used to do this with our staff. If we had a mandate that we did not like, whether it was from our local board or from the state board, in our meetings we used to say, okay, let's gripe for a while. I think I used a different word at the time, but I'll have that now. But you know, let's go ahead and express our frustration, and then let's put that out of the door because we have to do it. So let's figure out the best way to do it so it is most productive and the least detrimental. And I can tell you, after more than one board meeting, we said, how do we work this out so it's not detrimental? Because we didn't like what they said, but now that they said it, we're going to do it to our benefit. So it's kind of like, we're going to show them, we're going to make this work. And if you take that, we're going to make this work. If any of you watch Tim Gunn, I love what he said, make it work. I'm a big believer in that. You got to make it work. Whether you like it or not, you got to make it work. And when you make it work, then you feel better about it. It's, you know, when I'm going to do some work, I want it to be beneficial. I want it to be beneficial for me. I want it to be beneficial for my colleagues. So you have to make it work. So you need to use mandates to your benefit. And sometimes to schools, if you think about the change initiatives that are coming down, think about a high poverty school that is high performing and a high poverty school that is low performing. Which one do you want to be in to make the change? You'll take the high poverty, high performing, because they obviously have already figured out some way to make things work. They have understood the level of commitment that is necessary to get things done. They don't say, well, these kids. They say, these kids are in need, so let's give them what they need. So you want to look at the surrounding, but you need to think about that. If you're a principal at a school that has a lot of experienced, very effective teachers, you're going to do some things differently than if you're at the school across the street that has inexperienced, less effective teachers. Doesn't mean you're not going to address those mandates, but you're going to have to take some additional steps. So these 10 principles that we just looked at help to give us a heads up as to what's going to occur. So that means when you go in and you say, oh, listen, I want to share with you some decisions made at our board meeting last night. You know, that contrary to what we wanted, but we have to do them, you can expect some resistance, but then you have to get into what was the rationale, how do we work on this when you know what to expect. So let's talk a little bit about phases of change. We have 3 phases of change because we don't just say, okay, we need to change. We're on the good thing. We have it in place. We have to get there. And the first phase is the initiation phase, which is the beginning. And the main question that you have is the why. Why are we doing this work? What's the rationale behind this change? Why are we making the decision? So when you think about the why, that means you don't just change for the sake of change. And there's nothing wrong with asking the why. I used to joke about this. I believe I've shared this with my colleague Gail, that having been to State Department meetings quite a bit, I kind of had a reputation for being a hard worker, but for asking why. So, okay, why is it that you want us to do this? And then the minute that they gave the rationale, then I was fine. I just felt it was, you want me to do this significantly different in my district, just tell me why. And the why might have been because it's required. Okay. The why might have been because we've seen research that supports it. Okay. You have to be prepared as an administrator to give the answer to the why. You have to be prepared as a teacher to ask, well, so why are we doing this? What's the rationale behind it? And when you understand the why, then it helps you to address the concerns. The second phase is the implementation and you want them to move up, do you want that class or do you want the one that's in the 95th percentile? You want the 65th percentile because there's more room for improvement there. 95th percentile, whew, that's very difficult. I'm going to move them up a point if I can. You're not going to move them up a whole lot too fast. But you need to look at how do we continue to move forward. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the human side of change. And I'm sorry, I should have mentioned at the beginning, if any of you need to step out, the restrooms are right across. Since we only have 2 hours together, we're not going to take a break as a whole. But feel free to just go ahead and step out there. So, the human side of change, because that's important. Change would be so easy if it weren't for the people. That's exactly right. You know, when you stop and think about it, your issues with change are not necessarily the change, it's the way everybody is reacting, the way you're reacting, the way everybody's reacting to change. That's the other thing. I kind of get a sense that some of you see this in school. You probably can put a name to some of these people. We're not going to do that. Okay, so let's think about why is teamwork important, and what are some of the characteristics of working as a collaborative team? When we talk about collaboration, we need to say, but yes, so what does that look like? What are we looking at here? We've all worked in teams for years, and sometimes the teams are short-lived. We come together, we have a meeting, we finish with that, we get the task accomplished. There are many teams that work at a dysfunctional level. When we look at teams, there is a process, a legitimate process that you go through with the forming of a team. So you come together as a 3rd grade group or as a math group, and you have a certain formation that occurs. You need to get to know each other. You know, you might have a whole lot of people who like to be in charge. You might have a whole group who doesn't want to be in charge. You can see different issues that would be faced. So the forming, the getting to know each other and developing a work habit is understood. And there is even some storming where we're kind of struggling to see how we're going to work. But a team that is dysfunctional continually goes through the same process, forming and storming, forming and storming. What you want to do is you want to move through the developmental stages, which would be the forming of your group, and you can anticipate that little down point. But you have to get to a level of norming. And until you get to the level of norming, you will not see true productivity. You have to be performing, but you got to go through the norming. You don't just do the storming and jump right to the performing. So that means you have to work through some of those trials and tribulations, which means you don't turn away from the storming. If we are truly professionals, then we can say, let's talk about this, because we are not being productive. And if we have to come together every Tuesday afternoon at 3, I would like it to be productive. So how can we make this work better? You want to work with a team. Now, sometimes your teams, there's very little option. If you are in the high school level and our team is all the math teachers, and you're the math teacher, you don't like your colleagues, but you don't have the option of going to the English meeting. You got to go to the math meeting. So you have to think about how do we work together. Some teams, you have more options for flexibility, and that's where you need to make sure that you are. So we're going to do a little activity right here. And I can we're going to talk a little bit more about change, and then we're going to make a transition to talk a little bit more about learning communities. We are not going to be able to get in-depth with learning communities because we had to have the change discussion before. If we would have just been talking about learning communities, but if you're not willing to accept any changes, it would be phenomenal. So I just want to introduce this by thinking about when you have a school or an organization that operates from the mode of a learning organization, that you have made a commitment as professionals to put teacher learning as a priority. And that's the avenue in order to get students we are attending to it. By having that process, it works well. Now, we talk about collaboration. What this is to introduce you to, or to just talk about, is we have different levels, and collaboration is the highest, the most intense level in which we work together. It's also the most productive. Sometimes we have people who are working together, but it is more in a coordinated process. Now, that is fine for surface level things. When we were talking about those incremental or technical changes, sometimes we don't need high levels of collaboration. We can merely coordinate the change. So there's a bake sale going on Friday. You don't have to come together and collaborate. You need to coordinate, but that's all, especially when it's something that you've already done before. So it's something, but it involves more short-term goals. So you don't move away from it, but you can't only coordinate when it involves something at a higher level. We move from coordination to cooperating. When you are cooperating, you are ratcheting it up, because now we're looking at a little bit more complexity, and we're looking at having to give and take. So when we have one activity, that's the only thing going on, that's small scale, coordination is fine. Now we have multiple things that are going on, and we have to do some cooperating, meaning I have to give a little, you have to take a little. But where we see the most productivity is when we get to true collaboration. Collaboration is what is needed for more intensive work. There's some logic to the process. There's a system to the process. We look at it interdependently. We are working together. I'll give you an example of maybe a little bit non-collaborating. I've heard a lot of individuals, and I know that it isn't true because I've heard that too, but I used to hear stories about, well, our third grade comes together, and now we have to do our lesson plans together. So this is what we do. I'm the third grade chair, so, oh my God, you are just so good at math. You're going to do the math, and you're going to give it to me, and you're going to do the reading and send it. Oh my God, I love your science lessons, and when you send it all to me, I'm going to send it out on Friday. We'll compile it, and then we send it to the principal. That's a nice coordinated job that just occurred. That's not collaboration, because I do have your expertise in math, and we have your expertise in reading, but we are not accounting for the way that you like to address your math or reading at all. We are discounting you. That is not how we should collaborate. When we come together for our planning, we see how are you doing the math, how are you doing the math, how are we, we're talking, we're having that rich dialogue about, well, I did that strategy that we were taught in that professional development, but I found with our students, when we tweaked it this way, we got more out of it. And it's a sharing, and it's a give and take. That's what we want for true collaboration. So the more intensive it is, the stronger the collaboration should be. We get more from high levels of collaboration. When you are working together, you are focusing. When we look at the first here, first of all, we know our teachers work hard. Our teachers that are in schools that are less successful are still working hard. But often, going back to the example of Eastman Kodak, is sometimes how they're working. They are not on target with the way, or in order to meet the needs of today. I do not believe that teachers go to school and say, I hope my students are unsuccessful today. That's not what the teachers say. They want success. Now, are they always doing what is necessary? Not always to get there. But here is an example of individuals working and working hard, but there's no focus. They're not aligned. They don't see the picture on the outside of the jigsaw box. Perhaps it's never been shared with them. So they're each doing their thing individually. And in a sense, then we're working against each other. I'm pulling this way, you pulling that way, and we think we're going to go forward. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. So this is when there's no focus, there's no alignment. Here we get where there's a little bit more of a focus, but it's not aligned. So we still have a little bit of a struggle. We may see a little progress. We'll see a few steps forward, but we also revert back a little bit. Where we need to get is where we have both focus and alignment. So we are all clear in what that end product looks like. We all know exactly But one thing I can tell you, regardless of whose work you read, they're all saying the same thing. Because all of the research shows us we're all focused in the same area. It just may be the terminology that we use or the keys that we choose to define. So this is what we're going to talk about. This is the definition that we use for our professional learning community. It's professional educators working collectively, that's the collaboration that we're talking about, and purposefully, that is a key word, purposefully, to create and sustain a culture of learning for all students and adults. So often our schools have focused on for all students. So we expect to see improvement in the students, but we forget that if we want to see improvement in the students, the person who has to be addressed first is the teacher. It is unfair to say, okay, our students have to do better, and that we do the same thing to get them to do better. It's not going to happen. If we do the same thing, they're going to do the same thing. You know, and we just have to think, okay, we want our students to improve. We did a pretty good job, but how can we do it better so that their scores improve, so that their informal and formal assessment, that their day-to-day and the end of the year. We have to really reflect and say, how can we make it better? Which means if we want to change, we need new knowledge or confirmation of some of our, sometimes it's reaffirming something that we knew. You know, you've ever heard somebody talk, or whether you're in church or you're at a speaker or something, and they say something, you thought, you know, I forgot about that. I know that, but I really haven't been attending to that. That's a good point. Glad they're reminding me that that will give me some good results. So this is what we talk about in terms of learning community. And the purpose, the purpose. Often I will talk, and I think I actually have that, these key questions. I've often talked to schools and they say, oh yes, we have PLCs. I say, oh, you do? Tell me about your PLCs. Well, we meet every Tuesday from 8 to 9. Well, you know what? That's a good activity in your PLC process. We tend to use PLCs as a noun, professional learning communities. And that's fine if you want to use it as a label, but it's all about a process. And meeting together on Tuesday from 8 to 9 is part of that process, but it is not the whole process. So when those people can easily say, you know, we've been doing PLCs for a year and we haven't seen the progress that we thought we would. That's because you've been doing one part of PLC. It's the more intensive process that we have to look at. When I've been asked to work with some individuals that are operating as a professional learning community, I will ask these questions. So what are you learning? And sometimes I'm surprised at how they can't answer that. But you just told me you're a professional learning community. So what are you learning? Why are you learning that? Why have you selected that information to learn? And then, what are you doing with that learning? This is what learning communities are about. So we are learning more about a certain strategy because why do we select it? Because that is where our students continue to struggle. So we need to learn about how can we implement, how can we teach that strategy at a higher level so that our students don't continue to struggle. The whole idea behind the concept of professional learning communities is, as we said, learning for adults. It's learning with intention. So we don't come together and say, what do we want to do this month? We need to know that, what do we want to do is followed by, what is the data? What do the data tell us that we need to do? Where do we see the gaps? Where do we see that we have to do some enhancement? That is what should drive what it is that we do. So when you're talking and when you're thinking about working as a collaborative group, you need to say, so what are we going to work on? And where are our logical people? Why are we working on that? What are we going to do with that learning? You know how you've gone to sometimes, or you've sent teachers to conferences and they come back and they say, oh my God, that was great, I enjoyed it. What do you do with that? How do change process. And if you notice on the left column, we have shared and supportive leadership, shared value and vision. Those are our major dimensions or components of learning community. We look across at the school's phases of development, from initiating to implementing to sustaining, and start to tell you about how these things fit together. We're not going to go through it in detail at this point, but this is to just show you, and as I go through the dimension, I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of them. Let's start with the first one, shared and supportive leadership. So our research has shown, research on learning communities has shown that sharing leadership is critically important, which means sharing responsibilities, sharing power, sharing authority, sharing decision-making. It does not mean that the principal is the sole decision-maker at the school. And if you go back to the 1980s and before that, we used to read about the correlates of effective schools. And the correlates of effective schools, we went from effective school research to school effective research, which had a little bit of a different twist, and then we moved beyond that. And one of the initial correlates, Larry Lazard and Brookhover, what is it, Brookover? It seems like I'm pronouncing his name wrong. I mean, this is quite a while back, but one of the correlates that they initially said is when we started having to focus on instructional leadership, but one of their initial correlates was the principal is the sole instructional leader. How many want that responsibility alone? You don't want to be the sole instructional leader. You want all of your teachers to be instructional leaders. So we kind of moved away from that, and the whole idea was that the principal needed to be an instructional leader, and the principal is the primary leader in terms of instruction, should be the primary leader, but you have to have other individuals. So when we look at shared and supportive leadership, we're talking about leadership both in a formal perspective as well as an informal perspective. So we talk about principal, assistant principal, associate principal, dean of students, whatever your leadership, formal leadership roles are. We're talking about those teacher leaders that play a key role. They have to be part of the sharing process. They have to be given information. You want to make sure that they are given information so that we can make very informed decisions. The second one that we look at is values and vision. And the bottom line is a focus on student learning. But you have to think about, so what do we need to get there? We have to make sure that we are sharing that vision, that we are creating the vision together. Now, when you think about vision is based on values, and it can be difficult to come together with a consensus in terms of values. But we don't. We have different things that we value on a higher level than other things. That's okay. But there are certain values that we need to, as a faculty, as a district, make sure we are all on target, such as all students are important. All students should have the benefit for opportunity. So you come up with those values that you know are important, and you say, if this is what we want, what do we need to do to get there? And when you have a sharing of values, that vision is created. Now, we need a link between the vision of the district, the vision at the school, the vision in the classroom, the vision for each individual student. We have to, now it's a different level, but we have to have some continuity, some thread that connects all of these issues. When we look at the values and the norms, that is so tightly connected to the culture. You can say, this is the tagline, this is our mission statement for the school. And we have it posted in every classroom, and every child can say the mission statement. That's nice. And that is nice. But if you don't support what that mission statement says, then, it's the same as reciting the ABCs, but they can't read. That doesn't matter. It's what is it that you do? Do you make decisions Now, what is more appropriate is for the leadership team to be true representatives. And you know what representatives are? It means you represent the individuals that you are there for. If I am the third grade representative, for me to be an effective representative, I need to go to the third grade teacher and say, listen, we have that meeting tomorrow with the principal, and I'm supposed to bring our perspective. So let's talk about what, because I don't want to just talk about my perspective. Okay, so good. So I go to the meeting and I say, as a third grade representative, this is where our third grade teachers are feeling. And we come up with a consensus, and then I go back and I have to share that. That's what a representative is. So when we have a leadership team, if you are the 4 members of the leadership team, it just shouldn't be your opinion, your opinion, your opinion, and yours. It has to be representative. I had somebody one time that was complaining because they felt that somebody was calling a board member. And, we shouldn't call board members. And I'm calling, I understand your point. But how else, if the board, and whether it's the parish, government, or whatever entity we want, if they are truly to represent the public, then the public has to let them know what they're thinking. So you have to make your voice heard. So you have to say, this is, in our area, in our district, this is what we're thinking. You need to represent us. And when you see people kind of going off to one side is when they are no longer representing their constituents, but they are representing their own personal beliefs. And if those personal beliefs are not reflective of their constituents, then somebody else is representing the constituents next time. So you need to think about when we're going to come, when I'm in a representative mode, you have to be able to do that. Okay, our third area, our third major dimension is collective learning and application. And that is one of the most critical in terms of what we as teachers are going to do, we as administrators are going to do. You have to make sure you are being given or you are requesting the right information that you need to increase your knowledge, and that you are then, so you have to do that in a seeking process. That's what we want those logical people to say, I need that information. And then you are also translating that new knowledge into application. When the whole process of learning communities was being discussed, and I gave you the example of Eastman Kodak initially because the concept of schools as learning organizations came from the concept of corporate world as learning organizations. Peter Saney's work talked about, they did an intensive study, and they said, the Fortune 500 companies, the companies that are doing the best are companies that continue to reinvent themselves. They are companies that stay on the forefront of learning. They're continually improving. So this whole idea about that's what schools need to do if they're going to continue. They have to seek the knowledge. And once they have that knowledge, you've got to do something with it. You have to apply it. And then you make the necessary adjustments. So collective learning and application means we come together and we learn. We actually implement, we come together, we talk about our experiences based upon that implementation. We say, that worked for me, this didn't work for me, let's talk about it a little bit more. So we are constantly adjusting, we're monitoring and adjusting, we are refreshing as we go. The collective learning, these are some examples of things that you see in professional learning communities, the processes that they use. I know I referred a couple of times to Ascension because they have, in the state, they have some of the best learning communities in place. Because they do things so differently than they used to do. Because they come together. They have principals, they call it the PLC, and it's principals and central office administrators who work together. Their meetings have gone, I do a lot of work with that superintendent, their meetings have gone, their principal staff meetings. Those of you who have been in principal staff meetings, think about this, because it's quite different. They used to have 6-hour meetings where it's dissemination of information. The superintendent says no more than 30 minutes. They have other modes of communication that they use. Their meetings come together, and their principals, they have teachers that come, teacher leaders come to their principal staff meetings for the morning, and it's all about learning. They use student data to look at what their needs are. So they look at their high points, they look at their low points, and they make decisions based upon what do we need to provide to our teachers? What do we as teachers need in order to enhance? So they analyze data. They problem solve. They're constantly looking at student work. They're looking at the best of the best. And they're getting to a position now where teachers, the best teachers, are feeling comfortable coming together and saying, show me how you did that, because my kids did well, but I noticed your kids did a little bit better. They have so much transparency employee rating. And there's a sense of, and it's interesting because they have managed to get a balance between being a little competitive, but also sharing everything. So they are looking at data online because they have a new data system, and they say, we did well, but you know what, they did a little better. Tell us how you did that. What do you do? Oh God, we haven't thought about that. And they are all looking towards improvement. One of the comments that I loved that a teacher said in an interview, she said, I used to worry about my students, you know, the 100 plus that I had in my class. Now I realize as a ninth grade teacher, all the ninth grade students are mine. And that's how we treat them. And these are the teachers talking. They come together, and if the students are not performing well in your class, this has even evolved to the evaluation, the state evaluation. That was probably one of the most refined statements that I heard. An outstanding teacher talked about her evaluation. She said, I did pretty good. But we got together as a group, and my colleague was going to be evaluated next week. We talked about the areas that I needed improvement. How could she do it? We put lesson plans together so she did the best. You know what? The next time when she was evaluated, she did a little better than me, but I was part of that. That was a reflection on me. They are operating at a different level. Now, did they get there overnight? No. But they continue to work. They are operating at a different level. They are engaging in continuous improvement. They know they are good, and they know they can be even better. A lot of it is a mindset. A lot of it is the culture. And it's something that you have to move towards in a graduate sense, but you need to push the envelope. Okay, our fourth dimension is shared personal practice. Shared personal practice is one of the areas that you can derive the greatest benefits. It's also the area of all the dimensions that we see schools continue to struggle with, because we are opening ourselves, we are making ourselves very vulnerable when we truly share our practice. First of all, in education, for some reason, we have not grown up in a sense that we can talk about freely about the things that we do well. We tend to minimize that. And I'm telling you, if you go to apply for a job in the corporate world, you better sell yourself. You better say, I'm here because you need this and I can fill that position. I am good at that. We tend not, we say, well, yeah, we're okay. I mean, certainly you hear the best teachers talking about, well, yeah, but I could do this. And it's good to know where you need to improve. And you're constantly seeking, but we also need to say, this is what I'm good at. So when we come together as a group, when we are giving out responsibilities, we need to say, I'll take that one because I feel very comfortable with that. I know I have the expertise, and I'm taking that because I'd rather work on that I know I can truly contribute than to work on this, but oh my God, I need somebody to help me here. We have to be open, but when we share our personal practice, the schools that are sharing at high levels their personal practice, the focus is on student work. And I'm going to use the example again of one of the teachers in the interviews that I did recently said, I used to feel uncomfortable because they have teams of teachers that will do the walkthroughs like you do. I used to kind of feel uncomfortable when they came in because I felt they were looking at me, and I realized they're not looking at me anymore. They're looking at the work of the students. Now, every teacher acknowledges and recognizes that when you're looking at the work of students, you are looking at me, because the work of the students is a result of what I do in the classroom. But all eyes are not here. Eyes are here. And then when they're looking at that, they're able to tell the teacher, you may not have noticed, but these 5 students are struggling with that. It's a lot of rich dialogue, intensity. So sharing your personal practice. Coaching, working with each other, mentoring is one of the things in terms of administrators that we need to think about too. The manner in which we work with individuals will impact the outcomes. This just requires transparency. It shouldn't be hidden. When you know something works well, you have to be able to say it. Okay, supportive conditions come in 2 shades. Supportive conditions. And supportive conditions we see as the glue that holds everything together. If you are working to get these other things in place, but you don't have conditions to support what it is that you're doing, then it's going to be short-lived. So we have supportive conditions in terms of structures as well as relationships. Time after time, the issue that is brought up the most in terms of problems is time. We don't have sufficient time to work collaboratively. We don't have time to digest it. We don't have the necessary time it takes. I'm going to give you an example of long-term research that was done. And they found every school, high Relationships. When you begin to work collaboratively, sometimes there is not the level of trust. And when we talk about transparency, and as I said, that doesn't happen overnight. When we're going to come together and we're going to put out all the data, and this is from my clients, and it happens to be low performing, that can be a bit difficult. But depending on the manner in which we do it, what it should progress to is we say, oh my God, y'all, look, give me some help. My students are struggling here. Give me some help to be able to remedy these issues. It has to be a level of trust and respect. And when you have respect for the individual, and if you know that the individual is truly interested in doing well, then that level of trust and respect can certainly be enhanced. These two have to work together in terms of our supportive conditions. As I said, we see this as the glue that holds everything together, because you need to have the support in place for it to remain in place and for it to continue to improve. I want to point out one other takeaway. I don't know what color it is. I'm going to come out. It's the PLCDR. Is it orange? Okay, thank you. Let me just clarify what this is. This is a rubric, and my large, I'm certainly familiar with rubrics, without a doubt. This rubric takes the organizer, that initial piece that shows you how we conceptualize them, and it puts it in a little bit more detail. One of the things that we added in terms of the rubric is, rather than just looking at the traditional phases of change in terms of initiation, implementation, and sustainability, we added a column of not initiated. Because when you start with the initiation, that implies that everyone has started this process. But there are sometimes the process has not even begun. It's like, what is that? When you talk about shared leadership, what is that? So this gives you a little bit more detail. It still has in the left column your major dimensions, but under the dimensions in the left column, it has what we call attributes. It's the breakdown of that dimension. So the big dimensions are the components that you have to have shared leadership. You have to have a sharing of values and visions. You have to have collective learning. You have to have shared personal practice. You have to have supportive condition. And then we say what those, how do you describe those? And then that gives you an example of how that would look along the way. This is a good piece that you can use at your school for dialoguing. This is what we call an informal tool. This is good to generate some dialogue. That you might say, we'd like the third grade teachers to look through this, to have a conversation in their third grade meeting, and to come back and tell us, I'd like the third grade rep to bring this to the next meeting with the principal, and to say, what did you see as your areas of strength and your areas that you want to improve? But then you also need and expect some evidence. So if somebody says, oh man, we truly have that sustained. Really? Can you give me the evidence? What are some things that you are doing that you feel that you have sustained? Because it's easy to put a little check, but what do you have to back it up? So this can generate some good dialogue. And then when you start to look at that and you have a consensus across your grade level, across your content areas, it gives you a focus of where do you need to put your energy? What are the areas that we need to work on? A couple of big ideas as we wrap up. Learning communities. It's all about making sure that students can learn. The difference is that with the focus on PLCs, that process, it's about attending to the teacher learning, giving more tools to the teacher so that they can be translated to the students. And we do this through this rich culture of collaboration. The bottom line certainly is still a focus on results. It takes hard work and commitment. Your schools that are doing well, whether they are using this process or not, are working hard. They are committed. The level of commitment sometimes differentiates that B school from the C school. It differentiates the high poverty, high performing from the high poverty, low performing. There is a different level of commitment within those. When we look at the change process that we are talking about, facilitating, addressing change, when you have the infrastructure of the learning community in place, it helps to facilitate the change process. We're not going to get to go further into the discussion, but just to give you an idea, I have a little bit more information here on the whole idea about concerns. And I knew that we weren't going to get to, well, let me just jump ahead real quick, because I want to show you one little chart on the end. This right here. Whenever we are needing to address change, initiatives were coming down from the State Department, we had very few, I'm making an assumption here, we probably had very few teachers who their first comment was, so how is this going to impact the learning process? It's like, wait, what, I have to do this? What do you mean I have to change? It is self. That is a natural process that occurs. Don't fault anyone because they're concerned with self first. But when you know that they are concerned with self, that tells you you have to address the self. We know, now what our research shows is that in order for students to improve and to work at higher levels, we have to be in this impact zone. We have to move away from being concerned about self. How does this apply to us? We have to go through the management. That's the, how do you do this? What do I need to do? How does it look? How do I work with the material? When are they coming? That's all the management. That has to be addressed. Stop and think. When you've implemented a new reading basal, first you have to learn. You have to go through the manual. You have to figure out. You have to unpack the boxes. That's all management issues. But you can't do any of that stuff on the end until you get through the management. But we have to work with teachers to get through this in order to be able to consider the consequences for students, in order to be able to look at a collaborative process, and in order to refocus. The biggest bang for our buck comes from the refocusing. Refocusing means I have internalized this intervention to a sufficient level that I not only do what I was taught to do, but I know how to do it even better for the students in my class. I know how to do it even better for the teachers in my school because I know what it is that they need. So I have fine-tuned that. I have refocused it to meet the needs of my teachers and to meet the needs of my students. That's where you want to get. But before you get there, you have got to attend to these personal